Hello, I'm here today to explain how I make a certain type of bowl. I call them combination bowls because they combine different shapes of cast or hand-built slab into one combination bowl. I started off using wheel-thrown shapes, and this one ended up in a symmetrical composition. But recently I've been going through with asymmetrical formed, slab formed shapes and creating more complex bowls. And there's a lot of variety and expression I can explore with that complexity. And I've even gone into using this technique to creating vases and teapots with complex curved shapes. So to do that, to do this kind of complexity, I needed to make forms that were not symmetrically round forms that you throw on a wheel, but they're free form. So what I did is I made a variety of forms that have a whole different type of shape and curve to them. And these forms are made with styrofoam that's just been hacked and shaped into a general form like this, and then through successive layers of plaster and sanding they've been smoothed to get closer to the shape that I've got in mind, and then spray painted with Rust-Oleum so that they're durable and can handle the clay. So to begin, what I do is I take one of the forms, I'll take this one here, and I don't use the whole form because I don't need the whole rounded shape. I need to only use part of the form to create the part that I intend to use. So I just drape plastic on one side so that it's easy to take off the form when it's done. And then take the slab and drape it over the form like so. So from there, I cut and reform the slab to, as closely as possible, form itself to the mold below. Okay, so once the clay's on the form, I cut it and pressing against the form on one side, I splice that piece in like so, pressing it against the form right there. And smoothing with this wonderful tool, which is a cut old credit card. So once that's done, I'm not going to use the whole form again, so I can cut off this excess. Recycling it, of course. Then that will get smoothed out later during the process, but in order to then have it hold its shape, now that we've air dried the outer surface, we need to repair the joints on the inside of the form. So the best way to do that is to flip it over and just take the form out and take the plastic off. And you can see that it's still very malleable. I've actually got a problem here. And we're going to have to repair the joints that you see here that didn't get smoothed out on the outside. We want good joints so the thing doesn't fall apart, and you will see the inside of this shape when we form it with the rest of the pieces. So we want this to look good on the inside and the outside. So I'm smoothing it out as best I can while adding a little more clay to reinforce the joint, kind of spreading out from the outside. We've finished air drying the inside, and it's, as you can see, it's still flexible and ready for joining with the other pieces. But you can set it down on the table and it holds its shape, it doesn't flatten down. So we'll set that aside covered in plastic and make the rest of the pieces of the bowl, and then we'll go through the assembly. Okay, so we've made all the forms that are going to go into the combination bowl, and I've got an idea for how the composition for this particular bowl would go. As I said before, I wanted a more complex curved shape to all the pieces, and they generally have that sort of character. This is the largest piece, and I'm going to start cutting this piece into this one. And my idea is, we'll see if it works, we'll go around the edge of this in kind of a spiral pattern to create the combination bowl. So the first step for me would be to cut both of these pieces so that they can be formed together. And I've done this enough where I can tell, if I hold this up to each other, where the line is that I need to cut this one for this to fit. So I don't try to measure it out or mark it off somehow. I can tell just by looking where I need to cut. So we'll see if that's the case. Go in and just cut. That's probably not enough, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So it's definitely not enough. I need to cut more for this to sit into it. Cut a little bit on this side. And a little more on that side. So that's close. Now this piece has to be cut to fit into that. So we cut that one. Okay, so now we have these two pieces and we're going to join them together. It's the old score and slip, but with a little more of a robust slip in scoring, because there is a lot of tension that occurs at these joints through the firing. I've learned through sad experience that I'll get cracking at these joints if I don't have them fully and well formed. So I score where they're going to be joining with this wonderful tool, the X-Acto knife. Cuts very cleanly and deeply in a cross-hatch way, all up and down the future joint. Then I wet the clay to soften it. It has been blow dried a little bit and it's a little firm, and I want to make sure I get a good joint with the slip. Work that in a little bit. You can see it's really getting torn up. Which is good. Lots more places for the slip to fit into and form a good weld. Okay, and then I've prepared a very heavy slip. It's not at all light. It's very thick, but very liquidy and very sticky. So I put a good piece in there along the whole joint. That will end up squishing out, but it'll fill any gaps and form a really good weld with the other piece, so that it never ever comes apart. So then I take this piece and mash it into that one. Good pressure. Again, have a lot of time for smoothing and shaping later. What's really important now is to get that joint fully formed. So there we have the pieces pushed together. They're still very weak. So taking the wonderful credit card smoothing tool, I press down on that edge and clean off the excess overlap and smooth out, pressing in that joint together to create a proper bowl finish. Now that's good on that side, but then on the other side we still need to complete that gap and make sure that there's a good weld on this side too. And most of the time I can do that with this tool to get that smoothed out. But in some instances I need to use props to hold this in shape, and then taking some of my wet clay, making a bead in the joint and smoothing it out in order to make a good fillet and a good structural joint. So there you have it. That's how you join the pieces together, and we'll see how this bowl ends up when I finally put all of them together to create the combination bowl. You can see we're progressing in assembling the pot. The pieces have been put in a circular pattern around the core piece, and we're now finishing off the last piece here. My thought was I had a concave piece here which is different than the rest, and that I would do the same thing here. So I've got it more or less scored and ready to go. The bowl has been assembled, and it's spent overnight in a plastic tent, so the moisture content and all the pieces have been equalized. And the bowl's been gone over. I've smoothed it out with the cut up credit card and the plastic spoon to get into all the areas and smooth it and get all the joints correct. And now we're ready to put on the legs. We're here with the legs that I'm making that'll go on the bowl. This one's going to go on the back side, but I want to show you the technique I use. It's just a clay that's been pressed and shaped into more or less the curvilinear shape that's going to go on the bowl. And then I take another handy tool, a screwdriver, and scrape out a design or sculpt a design with this tool into the clay, and then finish it by smoothing it out with some water to create a more finished look to the serpentine swirly pattern that's made. So that's going to go on the back, and I'll finish that later. What I have here is a leg that's already made and already scored to go into this general area here. So as before, I wet the areas down to prepare them to receive the slip. That's been scored in there. Use this very heavy, thick slip material. Create a really solid, good joint. And we'll trim any excess off later, but rather make sure I get a good seal to start with. And then just putting that piece there, right there, press into the bowl. Like so. And then one thing I want to make sure to show is that taking this tool, because this connection is very important, this has failed before, actually go in there and press these pieces together. And I'll have to re-sculpt this leg, but that is never going to come apart if you really press that in. And with that, I just need to do that on these joints, do this over here, let these legs dry for a little bit, and then take out the scaffolding or these block supports, and the bowl will be floating above the table on these serpentine legs. Okay, so the feet have been attached. I've gone underneath and finished the bottom of the bowl and attached the feet from the inside connection points. And you can see that the inside has been finished and the edges along the top have been trimmed off. And you can see that there's an infinite variety of things you can do with this technique of manipulating forms and attaching objects, in this case the feet, to the form.